Howdy, this is Stan Partuce for the postgame show, Norrongard, Spectral Boar. Well, this one is basically 100% taken up by the DM's lounge because old Zajac wouldn't stop flapping his lips. On the upside, we do have a fair bit of Lou Anders on there talking, and he kind of looks like a pirate, I'd say a little bit, which is basically a sea barbarian. So that's a plus. Anyway, take a look.
All right. We're here in the DM's lounge, back with Lou, and thanks again for joining us here. So we can talk a little bit more about the battle, but I also just wanted to talk about Norrongard, your setting. I think I understand from kind of reading through your stuff that at least the books, the novels that accompanied this, they were really kind of maybe a reaction or inspiration by your own kids and some of the things that they were dealing with. Is that fair?
Yes, it is. And I want to say up front, too, that the novels were children's novels. The game is not a children's game. The game is for anybody who plays Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
The books are middle readers, so they're middle grade. They're 8 to 12. I think they probably come in at the upper end of that. I wrote them. This is Princess. Hi, Princess.
Hey.
I wrote them to be, I wrote them to be all ages. So I have readers in their 60s, but they are middle grade books. But they're my kids are biracial, and I think growing up, Spock was one of my favorite characters, and
Yeah, me too.
yep. So the main character in the books is a girl named Theana Frostborn, whose father was a frost giant and whose mother was human. So at 12 years old, she's 7 feet tall, and she lives on the mountain with the frost giants, and she pairs with a human boy from the Scandinavian-inspired land, and they have to go on the run together from several different sets of enemies in a Norse-inspired environment.
So
And,
go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, so then the books came first, and then the setting, or had you already been was that your homebrew setting to begin with?
No, so long story short is I was an editor in science fiction, fantasy, adult fiction for 15 years, and I edited novels for an imprint that I created called Pyre for a company called Prometheus Books up in upstate New York. But during that time, I also did short story anthologies, and fellow anthologist Jonathan Strawn and I did an anthology called Swords and Dark Magic, which was a collection of sword and sorcery fiction with both old masters like Michael Moorcock in it and new writers, new at the time writers like Joe Abercrombie. And while we did that, and the title Swords and Dark Magic was a throwback to Fritz Lieber's Swords and Ice Magic.
Okay.
But while we did that, I tried my hand at writing a sword and sorcery short story, and it was abysmal. It was absolutely horrid. And but the character was Theana Frostborn, and I was writing her as an adult, as sort of a female Conan, and
Yeah.
it along that time I was trying my hand at writing adult novels and YA novels, and they were all terrible. And then suddenly it hit me that the most interesting thing about this character was not her as an adult. It was how did she grow up as a half giant, and that's when the idea of writing it as a middle grade novel hit. And also, my kids were at the age where I wanted something that I could do that they could read because they could not read the books I was editing. I set about to write her, and at the time, all of my friends were fantasy authors. Some of them, quite well regarded, and if the ones that weren't fantasy authors are comic book writers, TV producers.
Fun.
They're all extremely accomplished, and I'm very confident in my editing, but I was completely unconfident in my writing, and so I was like, the only way that I'm gonna put this out there without being embarrassed is if it's so real that I convince myself that I'm not making it up. I'm just translating it. I'm just. You can't criticize this because it's not me. It's out there. It's real. It exists. This is how it is. and I'm just bringing it through for you to see, but it's not me, so you can't criticize it. And I went and I did like 40,000 words. This is not the way I recommend writing either. I did like 40,000 words of setting, and I ignorantly picked the this I thought I'd do this far corner of the world that was isolated and snowbound, and that way I didn't have to do much world building until later if I could even pull it off. And then I realized I really needed to know more about her culture. And the more I looked up the Norse, the more I realized that they went everywhere. They sacked Paris. They traveled to North America. They they traded with the Arab world. And so every time my Scandinavian people, the Norronians, encountered someone in their history, I then stopped and made that country too. And
Oh,
so
wow.
before I was even writing this book, I had multiple countries with histories and religions and funeral practices and major cities and language customs and all that. And it got to be enormous. And around that same time, I was noticing with the writers that I was editing that a lot of them played or even professionally worked in role playing games. And so I started buying role playing game manuals to read, and I'm not playing again. Don't have time for that. But I'm gonna and I bought the DM's Guild, and I bought I love Pathfinder's Galorian world and Kobold Press's Midgard, and I was getting all these campaign settings, and I just gradually started to accept the fact that both I was going to start gaming again, and that I'm a big believer in writing in the iceberg. Where you don't put everything in the setting, but because you know it, the 10% that the reader sees feels more authentic. So
Yeah.
I'm not putting all this material into the book, and somewhere in there I was like, I should put this into a role playing campaign setting because then people could actually find out what's happening.
That's
And
really interesting. So I hadn't realized that you getting back into gaming was sounds like in part a response to your research about writing these novels. That's interesting.
yeah, very much. And I also at the time, my kids or my oldest child was at the level where they were interested in role playing games, and so I ran a Fate game for 2 years
Oh,
for them and their friends, and I ran it in another part of my world, and actually a Swiss part of the world. And then when when that when the second novel sees the two characters from Norrongard leave and travel thousands of miles across the continent, and so the game I was running, I was building out the world that then I wrote the country or the countries that I wrote about in the second book, and
okay.
and and then it was on the back of my mind to do something with it in gaming, and then in 2020 the pandemic hit, and my father died in March of 2020 after battling ALS for a long time, and I found I wasn't in the mood to write anymore. And so I thought, I'll take a month and I will do a short 30-page adventure supplement in Norrongard, from the land of the first novel, and see if I can do it. And that month turned into, a year and a half project, and the first of the hardcover books and thousands of pages, and both of these,
Yeah, right.
and it grew, in the telling, as Tolkien said.
Are you still playing in that world now with your running
Uh,
campaign?
I am. It's. I have a dedicated group of friends who playtest everything I write, and they actually have not played the latest. The latest, we've gotten to the point where the adventure that's coming out in probably May as part of the. I don't know if you track Kobold Press's Tales of the Valiant
Uh-huh.
Kickstarters, but they for their first Kickstarter they did an adventure pack of other designers, and it was 7 or 8 adventures written by other people, myself included. and I did a first level Norrongard adventure for them called Banner of the Bull.
Okay.
That was part of the adventure pack, and then for their Game Master's Guide, there's Adventure Pack 2, and the follow up for that is Keeper of the Drowned, and it's actually written by Brian Suskind, two-time Emmy winner Brian Suskind.
Oh yeah.
It's the first one I haven't playtested myself. We had enough people volunteer to playtest it this time. I had multiple groups playtesting it, and I actually haven't run it for my own group yet. I'm going to wait till I get it up on a VTT and run it for them. They'll finally get to run something finished with me
Nice.
instead of something in outline form.
So
And
are your groups you're playing online as well, or do you play? Yeah.
online, I have a nephew in Tuscaloosa, an hour from here, and his wife, and then friend in Texas, friend in Seattle, and a friend in Atlanta. And so we play online. It's kind of an irony because the other thing I did over the pandemic was convert the kids' playroom into the ultimate game room. And have the ultimate game room, we don't do anything in it.
Yeah. I play online too. I started playing in the pandemic just because that's what people are doing. But yeah, because my friends are scattered. That's why I'm playing online. Because and you know that's a great thing about D&D. It's something to do. You know, it's something to do with your friends that you can do remotely. Like otherwise, you're just like hanging out. Like, how was your day? And it kind of ends. The fun of that ends, but you can actually be doing something with your friends, and you're not physically there with one another, which is great.
We interrupt this interview for me to threaten you. Buy these books by Lou Anders. And you can be sure in no way did he put pressure on me to say this, because, you know, I'm Stan Partuce. Nobody threatens me. So we got a novel, which is as he said, for young people. And then we got the campaign setting, an adventure, which is for everybody. Check her out.
I guess I briefly want to talk about Fate because I've never met anybody who's played Fate before. I've just read the book. I tried to play at Gen Con and couldn't get into it. One of the things I got from that, which I think really helped me think about developing settings for combat, is this concept of aspects, right? An aspect of something that just became, there's an aspect of big wall, and then you try and relate things to that aspect, and you can really do that with in D&D, you by just describing, like emphasizing a portion of the setting that you're in. I don't know, how did Fate help you out?
Well, I think that all writers should play Fate. I actually taught a 2-week writing seminar for kids using Fate, where I would teach them writing for 2 hours, and then we would play Fate for 2 hours. And it's not been, the rules of Fate have not been constructed to simulate reality. They've been used to emulate or simulate narrative reality. So the way I explain Fate to people, and the thing about Fate is, I once spent half a day on a ski slope trying to learn to ski on a snowboard after having grown up on 2 skis. And after half a day of falling over backwards and busting my ass, I just said, screw this, and I went back to the hotel and went to the bar. That's Fate. You know, if you start out on 1 ski, it's going to be so easy and so natural. If you start out on 2 skis, your whole life you've been 2 skis. Now you're old, you try and ski on 1 ski. You're like, I can't understand this. This is uncomfortable. I'm wasting my time. That was Fate for me. It took me forever to wrap my head around Fate because it's so different from everything I came up playing. But once you grok it, it's incredibly intuitive. And it's the way it is that in Fate, you invoke aspects for bonuses. And so, I say, like, in Dungeons and Dragons, you could never have Bilbo's conversation with Smaug.
Right, yeah.
Bilbo, best a 3rd level thief fighting an ancient dragon. You couldn't do it. You
Yeah.
couldn't do it. Bilbo would be toast. And in Fate, Bilbo has gone in, and instead of attacking Smaug, Bilbo is building up advantages to use later. So Bilbo intrigues Smaug, provokes Smaug, angers Smaug, gets all these things are now layered on top of Smaug, and then each of which can be invoked for +2,
An
and then
aspect, right?
then Bilbo creates the aspect of bare patch on the left breast, which wasn't there before, but Bilbo created it by rolling to change the situation and create an aspect. I mean, aspect is chink in the armor, and then the flying bird carries all that to Bard the Bowman. Bard pulls out this arrow we've never seen before, black arrow. I've had you from my father, but never mentioned you until now. You know, that's there's a Fate stunt called "I always have the tools for the job." You know, that's it. He pulls out the right tool, arrow of dragon slaying, +2. He takes all of the aspects that Bilbo has created in conversation, loads them all on, along with his arrow, gets like a +10 bonus to his roll, and one shots the dragon.
Yeah,
And that's
right.
you know,
That's a great, I guess, example of how those games are different. Yeah, and I can see that if you don't start out that way, I think that would probably infuriate some D&D players. They're like, that's not that you can't do that, and yeah.
well, it's like in action films. I mean, if the bad guy just if the good guy and the bad guy just trade blows like a boxing match, it's actually really boring.
Yeah.
Which is a problem with some of the DC superhero films. One of the problems. But good action movies, there's always a clever solution to the fight. It's not about wearing down the other side's hit points. So, James Bond is going to electrocute Oddjob by touching the cable to the iron bars of Fort Knox. There's something that you figure out in a movie how to do that then shifts the balance of that fight. And that's what Fate combat is. That's what anything in Fate is. So you can have a Fate game that takes place in a social setting. You could play in a royal court, and everyone could be scoring social points against each other, and that could be your combat. You could play Mean Girls with Fate really, really well. So I think it's great to teach dramatic narrative to writers.
Yeah, that's interesting. As you were saying this thing, I guess it just something about what you said made me think about what is it that still then remains compelling about D&D and other RPGs that are so rules based. And I think my wife just falls asleep as soon as I talk about any of this, and I think it's the reason those games are so compelling is that it's happening to you, right? It's a Fate can create an interesting story to tell somebody else, and be fun to play. But D&D, when you're in it, or any RPG, it's because you're in it and it's happening to you. It's the realism of that. That's part of it that's compelling. And then we were briefly talking about it before. It's something to do with your friends, right? It's a shared narrative. It's cooperative storytelling.
And Fate doesn't lend itself to long campaigns the way D&D does. We played for 2 years, and then my kids and their friends were all like, "How much gold do we get? How much gold do we get? How do we?" And I'm like, "It's not really about the gold." And I was like, "We need to play something. They're ready for something crunchier. They're ready for something crunchier." And
that's the thing I think that D&D did invent, like the leveling up, right? That just didn't exist before, right? And
I was totally. When I was explaining it to them, they're like, "It's like a video game," and I was like, "Yes, but reverse that." This is where the video game comes from. This is where all third-person video games come from. Yeah,
it's true. Okay, I'm just looking over here. I had some other things. So I wanted to ask you about what you're doing now, and you kind of told us a little bit. You're working with Kobold Press on their new game, which is that's super exciting. So what can you tell us?
I'm not working on their game. I'm one of the third-party publishers writing for their game. That's an add-on in their Kickstarter. So I have written for Kobold Press. I've written several things for them, but I'm not contributing to the development of Tales of Dragons. I'm writing adventures that they are offering as an add-on in their Kickstarter as part of their adventure pack of third party.
But then you're right. So you have then been able to play with that.
Yeah,
system.
and I do have I signed the NDA. I have seen a lot of stuff I'd love to talk about in cat.
Right.
But
Okay.
but one of the things I mean, it's a 5e adjacent system, or it's just a 5e variant system. It's probably more accurate. But what I love about it is they have taken the contentious label of race and they have split it into lineage and heritage, and that works beautifully for my world because I've always hated that giants speak giant and orc speaks goblin and and so in my books, even before I was doing the game design, the creatures speak the language of the region. Trolls speak Iranian. Ogres will speak French or Swiss or German equivalent languages. It where the monster is from is what the monster speaks. And I kept the esoteric languages. The Sylvan exists, Infernal and Abyssal and all that exists, but there's no giant. The giant speaks the language of Norrongard because that's the country they live in. They're just big people. And don't bark. I'm sorry, we're about to. The postman's here, but the postperson. But so in the Black Flag role playing system, your character has a lineage and a heritage, and one is their biological ancestry, and the other is where they grew up. And in my setting, and this was already there, the dwarves had an exodus from Norrongard 1,000 years ago, and only a very small remnant stayed, and then a large number of them moved into the neighboring country of Ireland, which is the big Celtic country, and then some of them settled in a mountain range between the two. And so you're playing a dwarf character by lineage, but your heritage, if you might be an Iranian, you were raised among the humans of Northgard and you live like a Norse person, or it might be Irish, in which case you were raised among the Celtic people to the south, and that's your culture. Or if you did go into the mountain, then you're a traditional Tolkien dwarf, living in clans inside the stone and mining. So you can be, your dwarf character, their background, their upbringing varies depending on which of those three areas you picked. And I like that a lot. And the way that plays out.
Yeah.
Because it fits with what I do.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure it's going to practically work out to be somewhat different, but the new D&D I think is also changing their relation with race and class. So it'll be interesting to see that. All right, so I've taken up a lot of your time. You did our show, and you're doing this interview. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much for being here, Lou. And I hope sometime we can have you back, and maybe we'll play some of your other games. And we'll see you again.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks.
All right, there you have it. You made it to the end. Thanks for watching. So it is with some sadness that for now we say goodbye to Norrongard. I gotta say, I kind of like it there. As a famous barbarian, sometimes it's difficult for me to blend in with the rest of y'all being bugged for autographs and such, which I don't blame you. Nonetheless, it's nice to go to a place where people are just like me. And it was a pleasure, Lou. You are welcome back here anytime. Thank you, sir, and thank you for watching.